Okay, so now I'm here with journal entry number 11, and today I will be discussing the second act of a story, as well as thick plots, chitty chat that goes on in the script, and exposition at the same time. And the overall importance of the second act, it's very important that the second act is where you kind of have to break everything down. You now have to kind of get the movie going all the way if the first act wasn't enough. The second act is where you start to get the story unraveling, the plots through, the big events that are going to happen, and so on and so forth. And with the film that impressed me, I have to say that I've seen this movie a few times, and honestly, it really does a good job of kind of elaborating these thick plots and how the second act can really change the dynamics of the entire movie. But narratively, this film that I picked, it does a really good job of kind of introducing the second act in a very good way, as well as starting to bring the plot and the ideas up to the main front. So the main definitions I have for thick plots, essentially, it says actions stimulate reactions, which stimulate further actions. So essentially, when one thing's happening, something for that happens, and then the next part has another reaction to it. So it's like a chain of events leading up throughout the second act, which will come through in the climax of what happens and how it could lead into your third act, which we'll talk about soon. Another part of the concepts is to kill chitty chat. Mostly cut dialogue that you think doesn't need to be in there. Cut dialogue that really has nothing to do with the plot. Because at this point in the second act, this is where you need to get your story going. It needs to start running, and it needs to start picking up its pace and getting to the movie, the point of what we're trying to figure out. And another thing is exposed exposition. Essentially, exposition is where you have to give details to the audience about the story. In some versions, I've been told that. And really, you kind of have to cut that exposition down a little bit. But at the same time, when it comes to exposed exposition, it's where you now have to say it. You kind of have to, through your actions or the words, like what's going to happen. Like, oh, that meteor's falling. Or, oh, this is happening. Like, it's to set up what's going on and then the chain of events that throughout the second act to where it comes to the climax of that, you know, exposition that's been told. And really, exposition can be, it can be a lot, especially in movies, like exposition dump, expedition's dump. Like characters are just introduced to give exposition. So you really got to keep an eye out for it because it can cause a lot of damage and it can get crazy when it comes to your film. The purposes of these concepts, really, they just strengthen your film. They really do a good job at kind of, I would say, grounding your movie in a way that you want to tell it. And anybody can recognize these when people like the exposition, like you can talk about the plot. You notice in the second act that not a whole lot of people are talking, it's just an action thing, or so on and so forth. And even like the plot is just starting to go and it's starting to get faster and it's starting to get stronger. So you can see it just like that. And the advantages, I would say, for these little points, it's really, I would say it gets your movie going. Like I said, like some good films out there do a really great job within their second acts because you get the plot moving, you get the story going forward, you get the characters now interacting, and they start to kind of get to know each other, and you get to see the middle chapter of a story. Basically, you get to see how things are going to go and the adventures. And however, there are just disadvantages to that, where it's the second act can really feel like the first act if you don't do it right. It can feel like yet again more setups and more introductions when you just need to get to the base of it and you need to start figuring out how it can really go forward in that sense. So the best way a strategy can implement these theories, I would say that once you get your first act and you introduce everything, you introduce what the people, the location, the events, and then once you start doing Act 2, you can start exploring it a little bit more, start building on those layers to evidently release something good that can come out of it. And so the film I'm going to be talking about is BlacKkKlansman, which is based on a true story in which an African American police officer kind of sneaks into the KKK's operations by talking to them on the phone and then sending a white person out impersonating him. And so the movie does a good job of giving you a plot that kind of follows the action to a reaction to another action and reaction. It's a linear pace type story that follows on this man tricking these white supremacy groups. And the film does a good job of that thick plot. It does a good job of getting you from one point A to point B to point C and point B, just like that. Reactions to the actions being caused. And the exposition starts to kind of show its way a little bit, but it doesn't do it too much. It just lets the audience know what's going on, and then the film carries on with it. And the movie does a good job of doing all those parts and applying those set theories to this true story and seeing, like, is this going to go good? Is this going to go bad? We just don't know. And I wouldn't really say there are any bad moments in the film, because it is like there are some, like there are, you could say there are some inaccurate details that they put into the movie, but that's just because they try to make it movie quality. They have to kind of change some things around, but they keep the basic idea the same. But the best elements is that essentially it's more in line with what's been said and done in the past, and that the plot does a good job of, laying down these features and continuing with it. So I will use these week's theories in the writing process by essentially focusing more on the second act, focusing on, okay, where is it going to begin and how is it going to get to this climax and then end the way that I want it to lead into the third act. And learning from the film is that, like, you can have like a very coherent plot as long as you kind of understand you need to cut some things like exposition and chit chat to get to another point in the film that's important, but it's never too important to cut out. So I would say this film told me, just slow down with the dialogue and the topics and kind of focus on your main story right then and there. And that's something, I've taken away from this film. And the connections I find between this, it's in other movies, like the second plot is where things start to get going, and then the climax happens where something goes wrong or goes good, and then at the end of the second act, you just have to kind of pick up and deal with the aftermath of it. And you see it in superhero movies and other classic films all the time. And these theories have been really good, and they really set the standard for how your second act needs to be, and it needs to be done right. So to summarize, second acts are very important. Your plot needs to get going. You need to kill some dialogue and some chit chat if you need to get the story going, but never be afraid to put them in because it adds character and develops moments. So personally, I would say go out and watch BlacKkKlansman. It's a good film, and it really, when the second act hits, it hits hard and it hits good. My citation is Lou Hunter, the Act 2 script. This is Justin Rodriguez, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.